breaking news today that the Queen's doctors are concerned about her health, and her close family members have assembled at her bedside. Thoughts unfortunately turn for many to what happens when the Queen dies. It's a day that will inevitably come, and one that the monarch, the royal family and the government have been planning for some time. So what exactly will actually happen, and how will the public be told? Will Prince Charles automatically become king? And will we get a day off to mourn as her funeral takes place? Read on for our full timeline of events for what will occur following the death of the Queen. What happens when the Queen dies? The public could be alerted to a deterioration in the Queen's health in the lead up to her death, if it is expected due to illness. A brief bulletin will be published from Buckingham Palace, and this is something that happened in the lead up to the death of the Queen's father, King George V. On the night of his death, a statement announced, "The King's life is moving peacefully towards its close." After her death, the Queen would be joined by her senior doctor, Professor Hugh Thomas. He will be in charge of who goes in and out of her room and when the details of her death should be made public. What happens next? According to Politico, the day of the Queen's death will be referred to as D-Day by officials. Each day leading up to her funeral will then be internally referred to as D-Day +1, D-Day +2 and so on. In the hours after her death, a call cascade will take place. Sir Christopher Geidt, the Queen's private secretary, will be in charge of informing the Prime Minister of the Queen's death. The Cabinet Secretary and a number of the most senior ministers and officials are told next. The code word, London Bridge, will be used to announce her death to officials. Civil servants are expected to say, "London Bridge is down," on secure lines. The Cabinet Secretary will then relay the news to ministers and senior civil servants via email. After receiving the email, flags across Whitehall will fly at half-mast. Officials are expected to make this happen within 10 minutes of being made aware of her death. The Foreign Office's Global Response Centre will then share the news to the 15 governments outside the UK where the Queen is also the head of state, and the 36 other nations of the Commonwealth. How will the public be told when the Queen dies? If the Queen's death is expected, the news will spread via the main TV channels first. All BBC programmes will be paused to show the BBC One feed, which will detail her passing, much like the coverage when Prince Philip died. Newsreaders will wear black suits and ties, which they keep on standby with them at all times. If the news is unexpected, an announcement will go out first to the Press Association, a global news agency, and the rest of the world's media simultaneously. As per tradition, a footman in mourning clothes will walk out of Buckingham Palace and pin a black-edged notice to the gates. Back in April 2021, an easel announcing the death of Prince Philip was placed outside of Buckingham Palace. While this is done, the royal family's website will change to a black holding page with a short statement confirming the Queen's death. The government website will display a black banner at the top and government social media pages will show the same black banner. Social media profile pictures will be changed to the departmental crest. When it comes to sharing posts, all non-urgent content will be shelved. Retweets are banned unless cleared by the central government head of communications. A radio alert transmission system known commonly as RATS, a wartime alarm, will also be activated. A network of blue, obit lights will alert presenters to play inoffensive music and prepare for a newsflash. In 2011, BBC Radio 1 head of music Chris Price wrote on the Huffington Post, "If you ever hear Haunted Dancehall, Nursery Remix, by Sabres of Paradise on daytime Radio 1, turn the TV on." Something terrible has just happened. All major radio and TV channels will be in full mourning. Elsewhere, pilots will announce the death of the Queen during flights and all comedy TV shows will be pulled until after the funeral. Nicoletta Gullis, an associate professor of history at the University of New Hampshire who specializes in modern British history, told Reader's Digest what she thinks will happen next. After the initial announcement, we can expect wall-to-wall news coverage of the Queen's life and legacy, she said. All major radio and television broadcast services will be in full mourning. This means that only solemn music shall be played and/or special commemorative programs or discussions aired. Gavin Hughes, director of the Irish Conflict Archaeology Network at the Centre for Medieval Renaissance Studies at Trinity College Dublin, added. What happens next? The Prime Minister will be the first member of the government to make a statement. The Ministry of Defence will arrange for gun salutes to take place at all saluting stations and a national minute's silence will be announced. The PM will then hold an audience with the new king, and at 6 p.m., King Charles will deliver a broadcast to the nation. At the same time, there will be a service of remembrance at St. Paul's Cathedral attended by the PM and a small number of senior ministers. What happens to the Queen's body ahead of the funeral? The day of the Queen's death will be followed by a 12-day mourning period. During this time, the Queen's body will be moved to Buckingham Palace and preparations will be made for her state funeral. The Archbishop of Canterbury will be in charge of funeral proceedings. Different plans are in place depending on where the Queen is when she dies. If the Queen dies at Sandringham, her residence in Norfolk, her body will be carried by royal train to St. Pancras in London. Here, her coffin will be met by the PM and cabinet ministers. If she dies at Balmoral in Scotland, Operation Unicorn will be activated. This will see her body carried down to London by royal train. If not, Operation Overstudy will be triggered, meaning the coffin will be transferred by plane. The PM and ministers will attend a reception to welcome the coffin in this instance too. However, some Scottish rituals would take place after her death. The Queen's body would be moved to Holyrood House in Edinburgh, then carried up the city's Royal Mile to St. Giles Cathedral for a service before being placed on the royal train to London. Members of the public will likely wait along the route to throw flowers and pay their respects as the train passes by. When Queen Elizabeth dies, does Charles automatically become king? Although there will be many rituals and ceremonies, Prince Charles becomes king instantaneously following the death of his mother. Nicoletta Gullis added, "The moment the Queen dies, Charles becomes the sovereign, a quasi-mystical transformation that is marked ceremonially and legally the next day." The code name for Charles's accession to the throne is Operation Springtide. Once the flags have been lowered and the cannons fired, marking the Queen's death, the Prime Minister will hold his first audience with the new king. To ensure a smooth transition to the new official head of state, all members of Parliament will gather to swear allegiance to the king. At 10 a.m. on the day after the Queen's death, D-Day +1, the Accession Council meets at St. James' Palace to proclaim King Charles the new sovereign. If Charles chooses to keep his own name, royals can choose another upon ascending to the throne. He will be known as King Charles III. Will Camilla become queen? At 11 a.m., Charles will be proclaimed king and he will swear an oath called the Accession Declaration. Reports indicate this is where Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, may be introduced as Queen Consort. The proclamation will then be read at St. James's Palace and the Royal Exchange in London. This will confirm Charles as king. Trumpets will sound, the flag will be raised back up and cannons will go off in a royal salute. Parliament will meet to agree on a message of condolence. After this, all other parliamentary business will be suspended for 10 days. Plans for King Charles's coronation will come at a later date. It'll happen a few months after her death. Similarly, confirmation of Prince William becoming Prince of Wales will follow in due course. What happens when the Queen dies? D-Day +3. In the afternoon, King Charles will embark on a tour of the United Kingdom. It'll start with a visit to the Scottish Parliament and a service at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. The following day, in London, a rehearsal will take place for Operation Lion. This is the procession of the coffin from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster. How will the public pay their respects? On D-Day +5, the Queen will be moved from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster for the public viewing of her casket at Westminster Hall. Here, she will lie in state and mourners will stream past for 23 hours a day for 4 days. There will be a service in Westminster Hall following the coffin's arrival. D-Day +6 will see the Queen will lie in state at the Palace of Westminster for 3 days. The operation is code-named Feather. The coffin will be placed on a catafalque, a wooden framework, draped in purple in Westminster Hall. The orb, the scepter and the imperial crown is fixed in place, with soldiers standing guard. King Charles will lead the mourners. Tickets will be issued for VIPs so they can have a time slot. Also on D-Day +6, a rehearsal will take place for the state funeral procession. What will the Queen's funeral be like? Who will attend? It's likely the Queen would have a state funeral with around 2,000 in attendance, COVID permitting. The royal family will announce plans for the funeral. It's expected to be held 10 days after her death. It's believed the state funeral would be held at Westminster Abbey and would include a procession in London and Windsor and a nationwide 2-minute silence. The country will be given a national day of mourning and Big Ben will chime at 9 a.m. on the day. The crown jewels will be cleaned that morning before the coffin arrives at Westminster Abbey at 11 a.m. The country will fall silent. Shops are expected to close, as is the stock market. Plans reportedly exist for football stadiums to host memorial services. Will the Queen's funeral be a bank holiday? Will Brits get a day off? The Queen's funeral and King Charles's coronation will become national holidays. However, it's thought it'll be left up to individual companies if they give their employees the day off. The day will effectively be a bank holiday, although it will not be named as such. Reports suggest that if the funeral falls on the weekend or an existing bank holiday, an extra bank holiday will not be granted. If the funeral falls on a weekday, the government does not plan to order employers to give employees the day off. It's thought this will be a matter between employers and their staff. What happens after the funeral? Once the Queen's coffin departs Westminster Abbey, it is placed on a green gun carriage. This was previously used for her father, grandfather and great-grandfather. It is pulled by 138 junior sailors, a tradition that began when Queen Victoria's funeral horses looked set to bolt and the Navy stepped in. Following the procession on the Mall, the Queen's hearse drives to Windsor Castle. Where will our Queen be buried? After the funeral, the Queen's body will be brought home to Windsor Castle. For centuries, members of the royal family have been buried at St. George's Chapel. But it's thought the Queen will rest elsewhere. Her final resting place will be beside Prince Philip, who currently rests in the chapel's royal vault. His body will likely be moved with hers to King George VI Memorial Chapel at Windsor Castle. This is where her father, mother and sister Princess Margaret are buried. However, although much of her funeral will be public, the part where she is entered into the chapel and laid to rest will be entirely private.